I certainly think that the Peoples of Edinburgh project is one of the greatest achievements, and particularly with the work with the children, because that was done with a form of oral history like I had never seen it before. The Mary Walters had got them to lie down on a piece of paper and draw around them, and they brought in anything to do with their culture, photographs, objects, and those were then put on the outlines of themselves. And then they were recorded talking about their art, but because the things that were on the paper were photographs of them, their families, their beliefs, their aspirations, their hopes, their dreams, their culture, although they were actually talking about their art, what they were really talking about was themselves. But if you put a microphone in front of an Asian boy and said, "Oh, can you tell me, what you've got in your pocket?" almost, you wouldn't get anything like that frankness and that openness and that complete trust, and that was very good. Looking at combining art with oral history, that was a very good project. And that project led to lots of other small exhibitions with other groups like the South Asian Women's Group and the Refugee Council. So that really continued until about 2000. And then we get into 2000. Now, another really big milestone that we worked on is that in about 2001, a chap went around the People's Story, and then he wrote a letter to the Lord Provost saying, "Well, I really value the People's Story and telling the story of the people of Edinburgh, but as a gay man, it says nothing about me." So this was then put down to the director and landed on my desk. So in good networking tradition, I got together with the Living Memory Association and him and some of his friends. And I should add that he'd also gone to an older people's forum that City Development were running, and he said, "What is being done about recording the memories of LGBT people in the city?" So that was actually very clever, because museums have no money, but City Development did. And they actually came up with money to run a pilot, because what we talked about in our first meeting was that any odd interview would just be tokenism. Especially if it was done, "Oh, you're very interesting, I want to get your story." So it was, again, like the Peoples of Edinburgh. It had to be done, if you like, for the people, by the people. But with this money from City Development, we did a pilot. And that pilot then informed the Heritage Lottery Fund, an application which the Living Memory Association put in. And I will really give a plug here for Heather Robertson of the Living Memory Association, who's an absolute whiz in getting lottery money. And she put in the form, and we got £100,000 to run this 2-year community project. And this was on a really big scale. There were about 100 volunteers on this project. There was just one of the staff was a volunteer organiser, and the other one was worked with us more on the exhibition and collecting the oral history, getting it transcribed, collecting objects, writing the book, and working with us on the exhibition. But the 100 volunteers, they could record people, they could take photographs, they could go out collecting, they could create artworks themselves. So there were lots of different areas where they could work, and we had a lot of people interviewing, but with this project we had a lot of people willing to transcribe. So about 100 interviews were done, and these are all fully transcribed and are based in the Museum of Edinburgh. So that was very good. So this exhibition came about in 2006 and was called Rainbow City, and a celebration of LGBT communities in Edinburgh. So that was a fabulous project. You know, made lots of friends through that. It was very good. That was hotly followed in 2007 by It Didn't Happen Here. Now this was really quite a different experience of lottery application, because what myself and Sheila Santi, who was our positive action trainee in museums, wanted to do was a historical view of how Edinburgh was historically connected with the slave trade. And it was called It Didn't Happen Here. However, lottery funding, being what it is, wanted community involvement. So they said, well, get the Africa Centre to be involved. So we went down to the Africa Centre. So there was Sheila, who's half Nigerian, and I went down and we told them that we wanted to start a dialogue with them about any ways in which they might like to work with us, because we had funding for this exhibition. And this man said, how dare you come here and increase my sense of shame and humiliation? Why do you think we would want to be involved in an agenda that has been worked out by someone else? You have got the lottery money, the Scottish Government is doing this, but no one has consulted us previously. And that was a real lesson, because even though I've worked with communities all my life, I was very much aware, and this is what really showed it, that if you don't involve them at the start, you're likely, I don't think you'd ever get a reaction quite like that, but that's what happens. You know, you can't go along and say, oh, by the way, you know, we'd like a community group to be involved in this project. No, it just doesn't work. But we did get other groups who were a bit happier with being involved with us, like Men in Mind came, but a lot of these actually came and responded to the exhibition, so it was more done. Once the exhibition had happened, then they came. But doing this exhibition really fired my interest in the slave trade, and it was left with a very big question mark at the end, because 2007 was the bicentenary of the slave trade, not slavery. So anyway, so that happened. The next big one was Votes for Women, and that came about through a group of women being aware that in the 2000 election, very few young women actually voted. And they were sitting around and somebody said, oh, what would the suffragettes have thought? Look how many people were involved in the Great March in 2009. And then the good cause was born as a result of that. And that was a terrific Scotland-wide project. And we did an exhibition as part of that. But I suppose one of my, well, I called her our treasure, was Bessie Somerville. Because I started, as I explained, in 1985 with a fantastic collection of banners in the collection, but not one suffragette banner. So I put this picture of the 1909 pageant in the Scotsman and said, maybe somewhere somebody has some suffragette banners in their attic or tucked away in a box somewhere. And the phone rang, and this voice at the other end said, I was in that pageant. I was 9 years old and played the bagpipes. And so I went and interviewed her, and that was one of the most exciting oral history interviews I had ever done, except when she told me that Christabel Pankhurst gave her a brooch, and she gave it to Margaret Thatcher when she became Prime Minister. And when we were doing the Boats for Women exhibition, somebody tried to get it back, and all the gifts given to Margaret Thatcher were all in one house, but they couldn't find any note of this, even though Bessie had, or Elizabeth Somerville had actually got a letter back, saying that, thank you very much. Anyway, she did give us a silk scarf saying, Votes for Women, and a photograph of her wearing it. So she was saying, here I am, this is me. She sounded quite precocious. She went to school with the purple, green and white ribbons in her pigtails. And she was hauled out of bed to go and play as a welcoming committee to some of the women who'd been released from Holloway jail who were coming back to Edinburgh. And she played outside Carlton jail when Agnes Moorehead was imprisoned there. So that was fantastic. And that was probably the last exhibition that I actually did. And the latter exhibitions I was doing, even though my job had changed and I'd been made far more corporate, and latterly I was developing the website for the museums, so I was trying to get some oral history on that, and certainly Bessie had a whole page by herself. And I retired in 2012 when I was 60, and we were doing up the house. Jim and I had been married in 2011, and we were combining two houses, and that really took quite a lot of work. So in 2012 I was trying to sell my house, and then we had a big trip in Australia and New Zealand for 10 weeks at the beginning of 2013. But when I came back, I thought, well, although I've retired for a year, I still want to get involved with stuff. And I heard about this group called the DRBs. And I went along to the launch in McGilly-Doo and said, I wrote a piece saying, well, I used to work in the museums, can I help? And the next thing that happened, I was invited along with Katie to a meeting with Gillian Findlay, who looked at me and said, well, Helen, can we do an exhibition in 2 months? I said, no problem. Of course we can, because that was the place where I'd done most exhibitions. And that was a really exciting project. I really liked it because it was, combining my interest with slavery and projects that I've done with Votes for Women, but also working with the community group. And it's very interesting because I always talked about we, meaning the museum. And then working with the group, I then started talking about we. So my we's changed.
Tell us a bit more about the project, given that this recording may be available for some time to come. How would you describe the DRB's project you became involved in?
Yes, well, the DRB's project was to commemorate the work of 4 Quaker women and in their campaign to bring about the abolition of slavery in the southern United States. But tied to that was this idea that there were no statues to women really in Edinburgh. 200 statues to men, and only 2, but now 3 statues to women. 1 Queen Victoria, 1 the anonymous African woman and child outside the Sheraton, and then latterly Helen Crummy at Crane Miller. who's the only Edinburgh woman there's a statue of. So I was very excited by the idea of having a statue and just raising the profile of women that people really hadn't heard of. And one part of the story that really tickled me was Eliza Wigham, because we dealt with Eliza Wigham in the Votes for Women exhibition, and because we'd had a box made for her, and she was really quite active in the campaign for Votes for Women at the end of her life. But it's the idea that Eliza Wigham in 1843, a Victorian lady went up Arthur's Seat with a black man, an ex-slave called Fred Douglas, who'd discovered that when the Church of Scotland split, the Free Church didn't have any money, so they sent a money-raising contingent over to the States and collected money from the southern states. So Fred Douglas came and made a campaign about it. And I prided myself that I knew quite a lot of Edinburgh social history, but I had never heard of this campaign. You know, this campaign really must have been so covered up and not talked about. And it was called Send Back the Money. And there was even a song written. And the DRB sang the song at the launch of the exhibition, which ran from November to January in the Museum of Edinburgh, and is travelling round at the moment, so that lots of people can hear about these four women.
Exactly. What did it feel like to see the exhibition in your former place of work, to know that you had brought that about for a community group?
Well, I was very pleased and proud to have done it, and I've been overwhelmed by the appreciation that has been shown by the group for the help that I gave, because it was done very, very, very quickly. It was another example of how you should put community work and exhibitions in with the bricks and mortar of the building up of the project plan.
Well, I know that the group were extremely grateful for that opportunity, and it was all down to you. After that, you became involved in contributing to a Workers' Educational Association project, which is running at the moment, called Breaking the Mould. And the purpose of that is to create an Edinburgh Women's Heritage Trail for the period 1914 to 2014. So quite different from the period that the DRB's project had been working on. And some of the DRBs became involved in that project. And that's what's brought about these interviews, because people felt that in your own right, you were a subject who had transformed the scene in Edinburgh with oral history and attention to women's history. And so the subject itself has been brought to people's attention by your work, and that was vital to explore and capture. So that's the purpose of these interviews. But we also hope that you will have suggestions of elements that trail should include: individuals, groups, places. And that's something that you may still be contributing to us over the months ahead. But what do you feel about that project, Breaking the Mould, and what it should be attempting to do? There have been other women's heritage trails before, about 20 years ago or so, for Edinburgh, and you will know as much as anyone about that.
Yes.
What do you think this project in this time in history should be focusing on and attempting to do?
Well, I think accessibility to it is really very important. We did a trail, a slavery trail, and about 500 trails were printed, and I don't know who uses them or where they've gone. So I think being able to have something that's currently in people's minds that they can use, and they don't have to traipse around the streets. They could do it online in the comfort of their own home. So I think having that access and doing it that way, then you can encompass other media. But I think people think of trade as a sort of map that you go around. Well, I think a map is important, but having photos, art, all history, videos, historical stuff, current stuff. So I think the access thing is really important. I think also that groups, I'm very keen that groups should be commemorated and not just individuals. So, for example, the fishwives down at Newhaven, and these were Newhaven fishwives, but also Musselburgh fishwives came into the fish market. That's in Newhaven. Very important, Newhaven fishwives. That was a real matriarchal society, very strong women. They held the money. The men caught the fish, the women managed the household and managed the purse. But that was such hard work. Lugging those creels and the band round the forehead all over the streets of Edinburgh. Some of them just walked 15 miles a day with these. So the fish market. One of the strongest women's campaigns, I was told, that there ever was, or the most vocal, was the one against the closing of the wash houses. It was this was proposed by the so-called progressives, which were the Tories in the 1960s, and the city chambers were stormed. Councillor Cook, who eventually was leader of the regional council, was very, very keen on stirring up this campaign, and he got lots and lots of support. So that was very good. The wash houses were first introduced in Edinburgh. The first one was in South Gray's Close in the 1890s. And the aim of this was to provide washing facilities for a woman who was doing a family wash, probably for a very large family, when they might live in a flat with no water, or at the most a cold tap. And how, before in the 1890s, they did their washing, I really don't understand at all. So women could do their washing, but it also was a fantastic opportunity to meet with other women and have a blether, to get social support and, remove feelings of isolation. So it wasn't just, they can use the laundrette. It took away a whole way of life. The last one to be closed, I think, was Dundee Street, 1982. So it actually took quite a long time, and there were lots of campaigns against that. Another very strong women's group is the Scottish Cooperative Women's Guild. So something around the co-op and the co-op area at Tollcross. And again, the co-op did a fantastic job in giving women who'd left school at 12 or 14, giving these women a real sense of education, of pride, of self-confidence. These women could become chairs of society, secretaries, fundraisers, local organisers. And then there was the national conference. So they'd all go, and you've got this great hall of women who'd never been to anything organised like that before. So again, that's trying to think of a few places that have really strong associations for women's groups.
Great examples. Definitely going to be including those. With the wash houses, which particular buildings do you know of that are still there which people could go and look at.
Well, South Grey's close
Yeah.
is still there, so that's off the Lawn Market, I think.
Okay, we can look for that. And Dundee Street, is that one still?
Well, the building's there. I tell you, the building is there. It's Union Street Wash House, because that's now Printmaker's Workshop. And if you go in there, and if you go upstairs to the gallery, you can actually see where the drying horses were.
In Union's Place?
Union Street, off
Union
Gayfield,
Street.
by Gayfield Square.
Yes, I know.
You know, off
Yeah,
the top of
I've
East
been there.
Walk.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so that's
Brilliant.
actually a wash house you can go in.
That's great.
Mm.
Well, I knew the Causeway Side one. I have a feeling it was still just open when I arrived in
Yeah.
Edinburgh in 1980 as a
Mhm.
student. I've got a picture in my mind of it
Oh,
still, or people saying it was closing.
Yeah.
So I must go and have a look and see what's there now.
Mm.
So that you're
But
right.
people can actually go in there
Well,
and see it.
that's what I'd like to check out, because I don't know. That would be great. So
And I've got a
that's-
feeling there might be something in Leith
In Leith?
as well. Yes.
Ah, we'll try and find that out. Who could guide us as to that? Is there an expert on the wash houses?
I think where it is was by the old Leith Bards. No, I'm not sure what those are now.
Right. Try and find
I
that
think
out.
that might all be in the same area.
Okay, I'll look into that. That's great.
But again, Union Street, you can see it.
Yeah, that'd be super. And is there anything, just maybe a few words, where do you feel we are now with regard to the attitude to women's history? Is the general climate more welcoming and responsive in the world of history and heritage with respect to recognising the need for women's history projects compared to when you were working, say, in the 1980s or 90s?
Yes, well, I think somebody gave me a comment. They went round the People's Story and said, it's very biased towards women, isn't it? And I went round and counted all the displays and it was equal. It was equal men and women. And because women had a far greater say and a presence. So, oh yes, definitely. And I think TV's done a lot for that. All the, Scotland on film, all those, and where you've had women talking.
That's right. So that's made a difference.
Oh, I think so.
But
yes.
your work is absolutely vital to how it's developed here in Edinburgh. And so that's something we want to celebrate in itself.
Yes.
And perhaps the Museum of Edinburgh and the People's Story are both places that we could refer to that on the Heritage Trail.
But we still need a statue.
Yes, indeed. And there are moves afoot. We don't know exactly how it's shaping up, but something is in the air.
Well, that's
And a
be
meeting
good.
is coming, yes.
Yes,
So
something will
hopefully
happen.
Our work has had an impact and something, watch this space,
Yes.
is going to develop. Is there anything else you want to have the chance to mention or describe before we...
I don't think so. I
Call
think
it a
with
day.
the last session and this session.
Pretty good picture. Yeah. That's brilliant. That's brilliant.